Story, the one who looks out the windows. Story about the depths of despair. When everything seems to unravel, our mind often becomes a battleground between fleeting moments of clarity and overwhelming confusion. The dinner she had prepared a couple of hours ago had already cooled down. Tara looked sadly at the set table. She had worked so hard for her husband, took time off early from work, spent 2 hours slaving in the kitchen, then spent a long time getting herself ready, and it was all in vain. Alex usually came home around 7 p.m., but at 6:45 he called and said he would be a little late. "Tara, I'll be there in half an hour. I swear." He said this without a shadow of doubt. Tara believed him and waited for him. First, half an hour, then an hour, and soon she lost track of time. She tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. She understood she should take a fork and eat at least a little from the plate, but she couldn't. Her nerves were on edge. On the outside, one might think that Tara was just tired, but fatigue had nothing to do with it. Why is it only we who live under the thumb of this monster? Why can't I behave normally in my own home? Tara knew that if she snapped, it would be over. It had happened with Alice from apartment 38. It had happened with Rick, and she was no exception. 3 years ago, Marina bought an apartment here. The price was much lower than the market value, which attracted her. At the time, she thought the reason was either the neighbors or the condition of the apartment. But no, it was something else. When Tara inspected the apartment before buying and saw that it was in good condition, and the neighbors seemed like perfectly normal people, she kept pestering the seller, asking what the real reason for the low price was. The seller vaguely muttered something about dark forces and how he no longer wanted to live there. After such an explanation, Tara barely managed to force a smile and decided to buy the apartment. Why let good things go to waste? There are plenty of crazy people in the world, she thought back then, but at least she would get cheap housing. And now she cursed herself for that deal. Sitting at the kitchen table, Tara remembered how her elderly neighbor, Alice, had resignedly told her that her time was short in this world. Tara then spent the whole day in bed with her friends, barely getting up. When the doorbell rang, she immediately thought she wouldn't open it, but they kept ringing insistently. "Who can't sit at home?" Tara muttered angrily, but still opened the door. All her aggression disappeared as soon as she saw the tearful neighbor. "Tara, may I come in?" "Of course." "Did something happen?" Tara asked immediately. "Oh, something happened," Alice exclaimed, bursting into tears. Tara was confused. She couldn't understand what was going on or why Alice had come to her. Alice explained that her son had died. Tara couldn't hold back her emotions and broke into hysterics. But when she recovered, it was too late. Tara was in shock from this story and asked, "So what's the big deal? Shouldn't you be happy or something?" Alice's face suddenly changed, and she asked Tara, "You really don't know?" "Know what?" "In that case, listen carefully. Every time something bad happens to one of the residents of this building, the Faceless comes." "Who?" "The Faceless. We call him that because he has no face. Where his eyes should be, there are deep wrinkles, and where his mouth should be, there's just a long scar. He doesn't speak and doesn't really do anything, but he never comes for no reason. If you see him somewhere, expect trouble. He usually peeks into people's windows. Some of us thought if you covered the windows, he wouldn't be able to do anything. That's a mistake. You can see him anywhere, in an underground window, from a bus or car window. The Faceless will always find a way to make his presence known." While Tara listened to the story, she thought about the alcohol still lingering in her system. "Wait, what do you mean, the Faceless? Who does he visit? I don't get it." Alice told her about the creature that has no face. It comes to those who have experienced grief. When the victims see it, they die, and there is no escaping death. "Wait, so are you going to die too?" Tara asked in confusion. Alice sighed sadly and nodded silently. "It's hard to comprehend. How can we avoid it? Try to keep yourself together." Anyway, I came to tell you that if something happens to me, tell Elizabeth. She will definitely look for me." "Your daughter?" "Yes." "All right, Alice." The pensioner briefly said goodbye to Tara and went back to her own apartment. Tara spent the next hour processing the information she had just heard, and decided that it was all just the ramblings of an old woman. Her son had died, and now she had lost her mind, Tara thought, and lay back down on the bed. However, Tara changed her mind when she found out that her neighbor had fallen out of her apartment window. But Alice didn't die immediately. She spent several days in intensive care. Sitting at the empty table, Tara remembered the story and realized that she would have to turn a blind eye to her husband's behavior. "It's fine. I'm okay. Everything's fine. Nobody has died. So what if my husband has a mistress? Who cares? We'll survive," Tara thought. She rejected the dinner, and 2 full plates and an open bottle of wine remained on the table. Alex didn't come home until early morning. He wasn't at all concerned about waking his wife, so he slammed doors, turned the water on full blast, and then, as if nothing had happened, climbed into their marital bed. Meanwhile, Tara had already woken up. She saw a purple bruise on Alex's neck and asked, "Aren't you ashamed?" "About what?" "About whom?" "About Vika." Alex smirked and said, "Well, I'm not to blame that Vika isn't frigid like some people." Tara didn't expect such audacity from her husband, and she immediately flew into a rage. Unable to hold back her tears, she screamed at the top of her lungs, "Get out of here! Out!" I said. In her voice, the image of Vika and Alex vividly resurfaced. Her mind, almost mocking her, kept throwing up images of the lovers. Meanwhile, Alex made no attempt to calm her down. Slowly, almost cruelly, he began tossing his things into bags, all while mocking Tara. At that moment, something inside Tara snapped. She could no longer contain herself. She wanted to disappear. Forever. She wanted to fall asleep and never wake up. Tara sat in the corner of the bedroom, crying like a whale. She remembered all the moments when she and her husband had been happy, and there had been plenty of those moments during their 5 years of marriage. Exhausted, she collapsed into bed and slept until nightfall. In the middle of the night, Tara woke up needing to use the bathroom. She grabbed her phone and, with half-closed eyes, stumbled to the bathroom. Still in a half-daze, she made her way back to the bedroom and screamed in terror. In her window, the faceless loomed. He looked exactly as Alice had described. Tara understood with horror that her days were numbered, and now she cursed herself for her weakness. The faceless disappeared almost immediately as soon as Tara looked at him again, whether it was from the shock or the cold weather. The next day she came down with a high fever. She called for a doctor to come to her home and went on sick leave. Lying in her bed, Tara thought she would die from the illness. But no, the time passed, and her health gradually improved, and she went to the clinic on her own. The local doctor extended her sick leave until Monday. Tara was heading home, looking forward to a few more days of rest. While she was walking her downstairs, neighbor called her. "Hello? Tara, where are you?" The voice at the other end sounded anxious. "Not far from home." "Why?" "You're flooding us." "I'll be right there," Tara shouted and hung up. She knew every minute counted. Of course, she could run home in 20 minutes, but that was too long, so she decided to shorten the distance. In winter, some people crossed the road through the lake to shorten the walk home. Without hesitation, Tara went down to the water and ran straight onto the ice. Halfway across the lake, she suddenly felt something wasn't right. There was a crack beneath her feet, and immediately the ground gave way. She realized she had fallen through the ice and, panicking, tried to climb out, but it backfired. Her body sank to the bottom. Tara felt the cold burning her. Her legs went numb from the icy water, and she screamed at the top of her lungs. But no one answered. She kept screaming, trying to get out, but all her attempts failed. Eventually, the water reached her neck, and her body refused to obey her. Tara floundered, clinging to the ice, and soon she swallowed a mouthful of icy water. She began to choke, and then, losing consciousness, sank to the bottom. When news of his ex-wife's death reached Alex, he did everything he could to appear sorrowful, although it wasn't easy for him. In his heart, he was celebrating. Finally, he would have his own place and somewhere to bring Vika. "We'll call you back," the HR manager said wearily and hung up. John heard yet another rejection and sneered in contempt. "Of course, you'll definitely call me back." The guy got up from the couch and went to the kitchen to grab something to eat. In the fridge, there was a pot of buckwheat and a single sausage lying in a bag. John had quit his last job 2 months ago, or rather, his health had given out, and now he couldn't lift heavy things. For the past month and a half, he had been looking for a new job. At first, he thought finding a new job would be easy, but he was wrong. The positions that seemed appealing always went to someone else. They often offered jobs including ones with double pay, but there were always physical demands. And then there were the ridiculous offers, like going door to door selling dubious cosmetics, miracle gadgets, and other nonsense. "Enough," John shouted and slammed the fridge door shut. He looked at the half-empty pack of cigarettes, pulled one out, and took a long drag. He had to stretch a pack for 2 or 3 days now. He looked out the balcony window at a couple walking home with large shopping bags. John thought about what was in those bags, and how long it had been since he had eaten what he actually wanted, instead of whatever was on sale. John walked into the hallway, mumbled to himself, and went downstairs. He checked his bank balance, figured out what he could afford, and headed for the liquor store. He bought the cheapest lemonade and the cheapest bottle of vodka. The guy just wanted to forget and stop thinking about how bad his situation was and how the employers didn't care that his fridge was practically empty. He drank shot after shot, and soon his body started to relax. John wanted to call someone, but then realized that nothing good would come from it. His parents were off on another binge, and his friends had forgotten about him lately. Life's been so unfair, he thought sadly. John thought about how life had treated him unfairly. He was sitting in this gloomy apartment he rented for next to nothing. His fridge was empty, and he couldn't get hired for a job. With each shot, his thoughts got worse. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears. He sobbed uncontrollably, not caring at all about the neighbors. After all, at 11 in the morning, on a weekday, it was unlikely anyone was home. He wiped his tears with his hands, smoked one cigarette after another, and didn't care that he would have nothing to smoke tomorrow. He grabbed his hair with both hands and, on top of that, cursed the Almighty for his poverty. Finally, exhausted, he collapsed onto the bed and almost immediately passed out. John woke up around 10 in the evening. It was still not too late, but he had slept the whole day away. He needed to pull himself together somehow, because a whole week was ahead. He had to go to interviews. After all, maybe, just maybe, he'd get a job. He went to the kitchen, made himself some tea, and soon returned to his room with the cup. Suddenly, the cup slipped from his hands, leaving a severe burn on his leg. The guy screamed, either from the pain or from terror. There was something standing outside the window. It had no face, just dark spots where the eyes should be, and a stitched-up mouth. John thought he had drunk so much vodka that he was hallucinating. However, he didn't want to stay alone with this creature, so he rushed out into the hallway and started banging on his neighbors' doors. "There's some freak outside my window. Help me. Open the door," he screamed in desperation. No one answered on his floor, so he ran down to the next one. The same story there, and only one apartment responded. An elderly voice shouted from behind the door, "Boy, get out of here. Pack your things and run as fast as you can." "Let me in," John yelled, banging his fists on the door. Everything fell silent behind it. He realized no one would open, so his only choice was to either spend the night in the hallway or go back home. He stood in the hallway for about another hour. He stayed there until the alcohol finally left his system. On shaky legs, he went back to his apartment, but there was no one outside anymore. He must have just overdone it, he thought, and weakly collapsed onto the bed. John slept until 1 in the afternoon. He stretched in bed, then scrolled through posts on social media, getting up only after that. He was suffering from a hangover. "Should I take a shower?" he thought, and immediately headed for the bathroom. The cool water had a good effect on his condition. John immediately perked up and even felt a little better. He realized that as soon as he finished the shower, he would find the right job opening. John twisted the valve and already raised one leg to get out of the bath, but the other leg lost support. The guy hit his head right on the tiled floor with all his might. A red spot immediately spread under his head. After a while, he finally came to consciousness, but he couldn't even get up. It was as if his body didn't obey him, and it was impossible to collect his thoughts in one heap. He was constantly nauseous. Everything was dancing and jumping before his eyes, and for some reason, his tongue wouldn't move. At one point, he threw up. The work masses clogged his airways and soon Kirill choked on them. When the 10th came, Harry was simply beside himself with rage. He knew that John had lost his job and knew that this blockhead would have nothing to pay for the apartment. But he managed to persuade Harry not to terminate the lease and give him time until the 5th. But the 5th had already passed, and the rent money had not yet arrived. The man went to meet him halfway, but as it turned out, In vain. The bastard had already run off somewhere. Well, it's not scary. The main thing is that he doesn't take my house down, the man thought as he approached the familiar entrance. He rang the doorbell for a long time, but no one opened the door. Then he took the key out of his pocket and said, "You parasite, now I'll fix you." He was picking at the lock. The neighbor's door opened behind him. "Oh, Harry, what are you doing here?" asked Kate, who lived in the apartment across the street. "Well, I'm about to evict the bastard. Can you imagine? He's late paying the rent, and he won't even pick up the phone." The smile immediately disappeared from Kate's face. She sighed heavily and said, "I haven't seen him lately, and a faceless guy came to see him." Harry's expression suddenly became confused. "So how is this?" "I don't know, but go into the apartment. You never know." Harry, of course, went into the apartment. He found Kirill's lifeless body. He called the police and an ambulance. And then after that they locked the apartment. And there was no longer any desire to send anyone out of there. Sarah couldn't get over her visit to the hospital. Today she found out that her and her husband's long-awaited baby was born sick. Not only is this disease incurable, but he's unlikely to even live to be 20. Sarah couldn't hold back her emotions any longer and, having locked herself in the bathroom, quietly began to cry. She was afraid of angering her husband, because he had initially warned her that he would not tolerate scandals and hysterics in the house. "Remember, no matter what happens, don't you dare cry, be hysterical, or lose control of yourself. Got it?" "But why?" Because you'll die." Ben didn't continue the dialogue. Only once, when he was drunk, he briefly told her what was going on. Sarah obediently nodded, because she loved her boyfriend very much and tried to indulge him in everything. In all the years she had been with him, she had never thrown a tantrum, had never cried with or without reason, but had steadfastly endured their quarrels. But now was not the time. Now she simply could not restrain herself. "Well, so what? Let him divorce me," she thought. "Get out of the bathroom." Meanwhile, Ben was sitting in the kitchen and having dinner. As soon as he saw Sarah, he immediately jumped up from his usual place and forcibly pushed her into the bathtub. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "Are you tired of living?" Sarah could not stand it and screamed, "How can you not understand that our child is dying, and my condition is more important to you?" The man's eyes began to water and he whispered, "I forbade you to throw tantrums not because I did not want to look at it, but because he will come here soon." "Who is he?" Sarah screamed. "Faceless." The word faceless resonated with Sarah's ear. She immediately remembered how she and Ben had been drinking in this apartment 5 years ago. They had been drinking some cheap booze, since they were both students, and they didn't have money for more. He got her drunk faster than she did and told her a story about a certain faceless man. She was tipsy and at first she believed him, but then she decided that Dan was just kidding. And as for the tears and hysterics, firstly, Sarah had been a calm girl for a long time, and secondly, she loved Ben very much and was afraid to upset him. And they lived in perfect harmony and almost never argued. And now she has become a mother not so long ago. And despite the fact that the birth of a child is a joyful event, there are more than enough reasons for hysterics. Sarah wiped the tears from her face with her sleeve and said, Wait, is this true?" "True." Before Alex could even leave here, Tars fell through the ice. "Coincidence? Damn it. I've lived in this house since I was a child. Do you know how many such coincidences have happened here?" "Childhood," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Well, what about children? They cry all the time. I don't know why, but I don't know what to do." From that day on, everything was different in Sarah and Ben's family. Both were silent and only spoke to each other on business. Ben knew that Sarah would soon pass away, but he held on with all his might. One night, Ben woke up from his wife's scream. She said that she couldn't live. She sat in the corner and was hysterical. Tears were streaming down her face. Her hands were shaking, and her face was pale as a bandage. "Sarah, what happened?" Ben screamed, either from understanding what had happened, or from the fact that he himself was frightened by the sudden scream. "He's there. I saw him. Sarah stammered. Dan silently picked up his wife in his arms and laid her on the bed. Neither of them could sleep until the morning. The guy held his wife tightly to himself, realizing that they would not be together for long. Sarah had called her mother that morning and said that she was not feeling well. Sarah said that she could come at any moment. As a result, her mother felt worse. The girl spent almost the entire day with her mother. An ambulance team came and offered to hospitalize her, but the woman flatly refused. Sarah knew that her mother would not tolerate the hospital and would not go there unless she became very ill. She sat with her mother until the night and, having made sure that she had fallen asleep, left the apartment. It was after midnight and, of course, it was possible to call a taxi, but it was only about 20 minutes to the house. She had already walked here 100 times. What could happen? The girl thought and quickly minced along the road. She had already covered half the way, when suddenly a man blocked her way. He looked repulsive, and also unkempt. Sarah screamed in surprise and took a step back, and he took a step forward. Then the girl turned around and rushed back, but suddenly she was hit on the head. From this blow she lost consciousness. Sarah woke up in some gray room without windows. She wanted to get up or call for help, but it didn't work. Her arms and legs were shackled, and a moaning sound came from her mouth. WWW woke up. The man who had just entered the room asked her, stuttering. She recognized him as her kidnapper. Here in the light she could see him better. Tousled hair, pale face, blue lips, pronounced squint. Crazy, Sarah concluded, but didn't say anything out loud. He walked up to the girl and jerked the tape off her face. Let me out, you bastard. What the hell do you want? Good girls don't go out at night. That was the last thing he said. The kidnapper did the rest of the action silently, but Sarah screamed until she was hoarse. The girl lost consciousness from the pain several times, but this creature always had Nosper alcohol on hand. He used it to bring Sarah back to her senses. And when all the fingers were cut off, he looked at them, smiled, but did not stop there, and continued to mock his victim. The pain was piercing, and the girl arched her back each time. It seemed that a little more, and the girl's heart would stop. But Sarah endured the torture relatively steadfastly. The monster burned various symbols on Sarah's body with a blowtorch, understandable only to him. Then he put his feet in the hole. In the end, she died from pain shock. He knew that the more blood he drank, the more blood he would have. But the last time he survived, he saw that he had a lot of blood. He knew that the more blood he drank, the stronger he would become. After all, the voices in his head constantly told him so. The next day, Kira called Ben. She wanted to know if Sarah had made it home. But I thought she was staying with you, the mother-in-law replied. No, Sarah waited until I fell asleep and left, and I felt better. Can you imagine? Ben didn't answer, but just threw the phone on the bed and locked himself in the bathroom, trying not to fall into hysterics. The guy clearly understood that Sarah was gone, and if he lost control of himself right now, then he would be gone too, and their son would be left an orphan.